All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And we're just doing a test now. Okay, perfect. And let's just, okay, if anybody's on the call, we're just going to go on mute until 10 o'clock before we start. Good morning, everyone. If you can just bear with us for a couple of minutes whilst the attendees are joining, we'll start in 2 or 3 minutes' time. Thank you. Okay. Right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the One Spatial seminar, which is focused on data quality within transportation supply chains. Would you like to know how you can break the data chains constraining your time, budget, and data delivery quality? If so, we hope the next 30 minutes will provide a way forward for you. We plan to discuss the challenge in relation to infrastructure supply chains, the impacts and potential solutions, and including a couple of customer examples. Though during this webinar, we will specifically cover infrastructure owners, operators, and build organizations, I'm sure you'll agree that the challenges, impacts, and potential solutions that we discuss are equally applicable to other types of organization, supply chain, and industry. However, before we get started, we would like to introduce ourselves. So my name is Mark Bell, and I head up the transportation vertical within One Spatial. I trained as a cartographer and land surveyor many moons ago, and I've worked in the geospatial industry for the last 20+ years, both in supplier and customer delivery roles. I'm currently studying an exec MBA at the University of Warwick Business School, where I'm majoring in sustainability in business. I'm also joined by my colleague, Peter Holland.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Peter Holland, a principal consultant at One Spatial. I trained in geomatics and I focus mainly on understanding customer challenges and helping them develop the solutions to meet their needs.
Thank you, Peter. Now, I believe that we have a channel open for questions, so please feel free to submit your questions as and when you think of them. There is a little handy raisey button somewhere on the interface, so please do click that and submit your questions, and then we'll make time at the end of the session to work through some of those questions. Additionally, I think we've included some contact details at the back end of this webinar, and you are more than welcome to open up a line of discussion with us to discuss the topics within this webinar. So when searching for an image that best portrayed the potential challenge faced in supply chain data quality, this one stood out. It shows, as you're probably all aware, the timeless game of whispers. On the left are a string of suppliers all passing information between themselves towards an end client on the right. A client who doesn't look particularly impressed by the information he is receiving. Is this very challenge that we aim to remedy with our solutions? So before we get started in earnest, a very brief description and introduction to One Spatial. We are an organisation that provides solutions, services and products focused on helping organisations derive value from their spatial and non-spatial data, be it a data strategy, data governance, data capture, data transformation or data management. Our solutions, services and products help organisations across the world drive automation into the way they work and grow sustained competitive advantages. Now you can read all of this, you can read this slide, I'm sure you know where our website is, so I won't labour this introduction. But as mentioned, over the next 30 minutes, we'll take you through the context of the challenge as we see it, the impact it can have on organisations, a brief overview of some of the solutions, and then a view onto two customer examples, one in the world of highways and one in the world of rail. And then, as we've said, there'll be a little bit of time at the end to run through some Q&A. So, in order to describe the challenge, let us first define what we mean by a supply chain. So in this context, it is a string of teams and organisations that support the corporate objective of an asset, operations or build organisation. This could include internal teams or a number of suppliers ranged in tiers, ranging down from engineering contractors who might manage a host of activities to individual suppliers of specialist activities such as signal maintenance, environmental impact assessments, or groundworks construction. Now we see two different types of supply chain. The first is that of the internal supply chain, made up of a variety of different business units, regional entities and specialist teams, all completing activities that contribute to the enterprise's objectives. This is represented here by the smooth green sweeping arrow. However, the reality is never as clean as this. The reality sees various teams interacting with different data sets, multiple corporate data sets, usually siloed, and also with other teams. Additionally, each team can potentially have their own data silos, all of which have different tools and processes for update. This can result in, at best, a low level of data quality, but more likely an unknown level of data quality, something which is far more risky to an enterprise. Now, in addition to this concept of an internal supply chain, we also see supply chains being external in nature. Here we see the exchange of data in the handover and hand back between the main organisation and its tiered suppliers. Now, examples include the extraction of data from, for example, corporate stores for the completion of maintenance projects by external supply teams, such as signalling engineers. Now, the challenge here is How do those organizations in the supply chain know that the data being given to them is of a suitable quality that enables them to complete the tasks they are contractually obliged to? Another example could be the collection of spatial and non-spatial data, maybe, for example, environmental survey data, captured in the field and progressively passed back through the supply chain from the specialist suppliers to the engineering management companies and finally to the end client. The challenge here is, how do all the parties involved in the collection, handover and collation of the data know that it's correct? Should the data be manually checked? If so, should it be sampled or fully checked? Should each of the steps of the supply chain do this? And is this the best use of time and cost? Should tools and automation be used? And how can those involved be sure that the central specifications defining the structure of the data have been followed within those tools, especially when those specifications are incrementally changed or changing on a continuous basis? So these are all valid questions which we have encountered within customer examples. So in general, we see a number of key impacts of poorly controlled supply chain data quality, including increased time and cost from failed data submissions, an unconnected governance view of all data in the supply chain, and also further increased costs due to the deployment of manual processes used to validate that data. So how do we resolve the challenges and impacts of poorly controlled supply chain data? We do it by deploying a business rules approach to validating data. We seek to understand the business rules governing the way you want your data to act, and we reflect those in data quality rules, exposing them in various different guises, such as through web portals, via your GIS applications, or through a server-based engine interacting with your databases. We do this at different points in the data's life cycle, both internally within in the organization and externally, where your suppliers are exchanging data across company boundaries. There are multiple benefits of this, but they include automation, which means consistency in checking and completeness of coverage across 100% of the data, repeatability and traceability, enabling it to be run time and time again, and for a log to be created, enabling dashboarding and increased supplier governance, encoding, which allows rules to be extracted from people's heads and committed into repeatable standards. And with this comes metrics, allowing evidence-based working. And our solutions breed collaboration, both in the definition of those business rules, but also in the fact that we take away those labor-intensive activities, allowing your specialists to focus on more high-value collaborative activities. So what we deploy depends on the supply chain context and the customer's needs, but can range from one extreme, long-transaction enterprise systems such as our One SMS, to lighter weight data validation portals, which you will hear more about in the coming customer examples. The key thing to note on this slide, however, are these the data validation partitions. And these are the sort of purple lines that sit between the tiers and between the different teams. These provide an opportunity for the teams to validate data before it's handed over, and more importantly, enables them to decide whether the data should be released to their client, or whether that data should be reworked before it's released, thus saving their end client time, effort, and cost. So in summary, the benefits we see that supply chain data quality can bring to organizations in an extended supply chain, be it internal or external, include the cost and complexity reduction, so in other words, a lower cost of operating, increased throughput of data, in other words, a faster pace of operating, and reduced risk through better data, or a lower risk way of operating. So I would now like to hand over to my colleague Peter, who will talk to you about two customer examples within the external supply chain context.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. So as Mark said, I would like to take some time to really talk about two customer examples. We're going to look about the why, the challenge, the solution, and also have a bit of fun and show you a demonstration. So the first example that we're going to talk about today is about Arizona Department of Transport. It's a good customer of ours, and you'll see as we go through there are some live examples on their website that you can go and have a read and understand what they're doing. Fundamentally, the Arizona Department of Transport have a requirement that they need to submit all road centerline data to the likes of US Census so that they can actually have a view of the whole centerline for the United States of America. Historically, Arizona DOT really focused on understanding their federal highways, but with the announcement of Next Generation 911 and projects such as Arnold that focused on, if I wanted to send an emergency vehicle across state boundaries, would I be able to go and do that? Fundamentally, all about security and how they need to capture the data to do that. So the supply chain context that we're going to talk about in Arizona DOT is all the fundamental goal of creating a unified centerline, integrating the Department of Transport state highways with local centerline data. In this scenario, they're looking about data that needs to be provided once a year by over 30 local government organizations. So as Mark described earlier on in this presentation, the big challenges for them is almost a communication chain. How you can avoid many phone calls, many emails, many Word documents going back and forwards, chasing for data to be governed and integrated in their data set. The other challenge that a lot of you will be facing and the DOT's faced was when they receive bad data, how do you communicate that back in a timely manner and to ensure that it gets fixed? And with all of this, there are requirements, there's legislation and a government requirement to ensure that the data being used by the emergency services in the States is accurate. So how do you audit that? If you're a supply chain user submitting by emails or Word documents, it can be very difficult to understand when data was submitted, how, and what metadata has according to that. And with the DOT demonstration, we'll talk about how they helped automate the collation of that data, and above all, how to integrate it. So receive many different data sets that might overlap, and to create one unified road centerline data that can be used for a fit purpose. So the solution that I'm going to demonstrate in a moment looks about using the automated business rules, so validating the centerline data against a set of data standards, and also being able to automatically provide a non-conformance report to the supplier. So here we could be talking about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers wanting to validate their data before supplying it up the chain. And then we'll also look at the real-time integration. So to chase data from a supply chain, it can be quite consuming. If you make a portal available, you can allow them to upload data at any given time. The image at the bottom of your screens is quite an interesting one. So it really describes some of the context of what this customer was trying to achieve. On the left-hand side, we've got the source customer data. And on the right-hand side, we have the data that's being submitted by the supply chain. Now, when I quickly look at this, at first glance, I'd suggest that the data is the same. But when I upload against the system, I can check its conformity, and all of a sudden the system can tell me, actually, the only data that I need to validate and submit to Arizona DOT is that in red on the screen. So we've been showing you quite a few slides. I really want to point on the benefit of this solution and go to a short demonstration. The quick, real big feedback we got from the customer was that not only are we working in a more efficient manner and saving time, but that we're actually enabling the supply chain to submit data more regularly. And when we're talking about safety, having a view of the United States centerline data on a day-to-day real-time basis is obviously going to be far more beneficial than on a year-to-year basis. So I'm just going to jump to the web browser. Just as a reminder, this portal is in use today. So the web link that you can see on the screen, you can go to and read about it. Obviously, this is a live system, so I can't really go and upload some noddy data just to demonstrate to yourselves. So I'm going to now take a lightweight version that I've built within our offices to demonstrate to you. So I've got a username and password. I'm going to log in now into the validation portal. And the big driver here is to make it simple for your supply chain. They need to be skilled in capturing the right data at the right time and supplying it. They don't need to be trained in using the system. So I can click, or I can upload the data set, or just as I've prepared, I've got a folder with a supply chain, a real data set that has been supplied previously, and I'm going to go and drag and drop it on the screen. What's happening here is that this data is now being uploaded to our web server. As a user, I can quickly, simply click and view the data. And I can actually go and look at the data standards that I'm validating against. So maybe some spatial checks or some more specific data standard checks. And very simply, I'm going to run. So what's happened now is, as a supply chain user, I've uploaded the data. I've seen the data standards available to me. I've hit run, and all of a sudden, I'm actually giving metrics of where my data is 100% valid or where I need to go away and do some fixing. Now, historically, a lot of people would just receive these non-conformance reports, but what's really more helpful is actually to go and view the results and be able to view why I've got errors in the data. Now, if you're like me, we have a team of consultants here that do a lot of work for customers. They prefer to use the GIS technologies that they're trained and have skill sets in. So they could also go and click download the data and save and export the results so that they can load in their GIS package of choice. So I can see that we're starting to get some questions in, so thank you for sending those in. What I'm going to do is talk about the second customer example, and then we can hand over to Mark to try and answer some of those. So our second example today is really talking about high-speed railway projects and the enablement work that needs to go around these. So these projects are really becoming up and coming in countries such as UAE, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, California, and more closely to home, the UK. And what we mean by enablement works, a lot of this is the preparatory work that needs to happen before a build phase can take place. The supply chain context in this sense is people needing to avoid impacts on the local environment where a railway is being built, mitigate loss of habitat where we believe a railway is likely to cause that, and how we can compensate to create other habitat areas in the local vicinity. But what this really means is that there is a lot of data that needs to be captured, data that needs to be then supplied to the corporate data store, validated and used for the project build cycle. And you'd be surprised to hear that a lot of clients today are still capturing data on pen and paper, although there are some supply chains out there that are starting to use mobile capture devices to capture the information. This brings on the challenges in its own rights. So we're often seeing in some projects over 50 different data standards to abide to, different submission types, and with the short time frame of project deliverable, only the time to manually validate 5% of the data. So it's very hard for a supply chain to mandate data quality when only validating 5%. And as we said, the different capture methods, the different organizations, different skill sets and different licenses, we're often finding that the higher tiers are receiving these submissions in a multitude of formats. And again, there is a lot of legislation around these projects, and where project delays occur, we often find fines. So what we're often seeing is that an investment upfront in building these automated validation solutions is actually returning investment in the medium to long term. So the solution that we have out today, and we've been deploying in a number of railway projects, is looking about having cloud validation portals, web-based applications that can be accessed by external organizations. Very simple to use, it's configurable in that it can evolve as a project evolves. So standards may evolve over the time of the project. And we could also look at removing that chain of whispers and looking at building non-conformance reports and scaling up the solution. So I'm going to take a moment to demonstrate that. Thanks again for questions that are coming through. We will respond to those in a moment. So the second demonstration that I'm going to show you today, I'm just going to click on here, is again the validation portal. This one is actually installed on an Azure platform, so it's very easy to deploy and accessible externally. And again, we tried to make it very simple for the supply chain to be able to upload and validate data. So I'm going to go to my machine and pick a data set that is an example that we can demonstrate today. And I'm going to simply drag and drop. That's being submitted to my portal on the cloud. And I can simply select run. What we're doing here is we're running that data set against a set of standards and providing a report to the supply chain to ensure that the data is valid before they waste the corporate data store's time, asset operator, trying to validate these. So earlier we submitted a shapefile and some CAD files. I'm now showing how we can submit non-spatial data files such as an Excel spreadsheet. Now I've ran my validation, I've downloaded my report to my downloads folder. So we can see here that I now have a non-conformance report. So if I open this up just to show you the kind of report that they've received, this here is some mocked up data from a supply chain user. So we've got a database tab where they've submitted all of their data. And then we've also built in a report, so a non-conformance report. So if I just adjust this field, just so it's more easier for you to see on the shared screen that you've got today, we can see that I've received a non-conformance saying that my weather description attribute has failed having a value. And if I scroll across the data, I can see that indeed that value is there. So we just got to remember what we've just done here. We've allowed a supply chain user to submit data, validate it, receive a report where there's some errors. They can go and fix those, they can upload them again, and when valid, go and submit to the end user, who can save time in having to revalidate the work. So there were two clear demonstrations that we've just seen now, and I'm going to hand it back over to Mark Bell.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. So to summarise, we've heard how we consider data supply chains to be both internal to an organisation and external across multiple organisations. We've seen that poor quality, poor governance and manual validation can all impact on an enterprise in its time and cost. We talked about how our rules-based approach to automatically validating data can be deployed across the supply chain, providing a common and accessible approach for data validation. And we touched on how our solutions can reduce costs, increase data throughput, and ultimately reduce risk. And then we saw two real-world examples of solutions within the external supply chain, one for a highways operator and one for the railway build organisation. So my parting comments before opening the floor up to questions, and I know we've had some questions already, but before we open the floor up to further questions and run through those, is for us to consider the image on the screen and also to cast your minds back to the startled gentleman at the start of our webinar. So our message to you is that we are here to help you become that smiling young man in yellow by providing the experience and solutions to improve your supply chain data quality. So with that, we'd like to open up the floor to questions, and I know we've had a few, so is it worth just highlighting those on do you want to cover those, Pete, or do you want me to? Okay. Can we read through them, maybe?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for your questions that have come through. So we've got some really interesting customers that have asked some questions that we're going to respond to now. One of those is that in the UK, we have the National Street Gazetteer that has a data entry standard and a standard format that local authorities submit their data to and need to check against business rules. So I believe the question here is whether or not the portal that we've just demonstrated today would be able to do that. So thanks for that question, and indeed very much so. So what we're looking to with the portal is enabling those users to be able to upload any data set that they require to submit, and then the data standards are rules that we can configure in the system to validate those. So just like the Street Gazetteer has a set of known rules that are easily describable in verbal language, we can configure the system to understand those and validate the data. And where that data conforms, we can enable the submission through to the next stage, or we can provide non-conformance reports to enable them to fix those quickly. And I'm just going to quickly check the next list. We've got some questions about we can validate the data, but can the data be fixed? It's a very good question. We touched on that slightly with the DOT example, we were able to validate the data for non-conformances, and then we were able to go and integrate that within the center data set. So just by the same way we can integrate, we can actually write rules and configure the system to, on base scenarios, to go and change the data and fix it accordingly. In some supply chain cases, we've seen where users don't want to fix because they would like to leave the authority of changing the data on their supply chain. And in that instance, we'll provide a non-conformance report. And in other instances, because it's a known fix, we would apply automation to fix those. And I've just got time for one last question. So the last question is asking about our upcoming conference, Smarter Data, Smarter World. So we do have that, and there'll be information on a website to go and see that, and we hope to re-demonstrate the supply chain cases in those instances. I'm just going to hand over to Mark, who might have final comments.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. So we'll leave the line open for another minute or so. If you have any other questions, please send them through, or alternatively contact us. Our contact details are there on the screen. We hope this has been we've tried to keep it relatively short. We hope it's been an informative session for you, and we would welcome any further discussions on the topic and subject. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and wish you all the best of luck and speak to you at some point. Thank you. Bye.